Good evening and welcome back to Mr. Kango. Tonight we ride with America's truckers, men and women who spend their lives on the open road, and who sometimes encounter things no headlights should ever reveal. These 5 true trucker horror stories are taken from real long-haul drivers whose experiences will make you think twice about the midnight highway. If you're new here, subscribe now for daily true horror stories, and let's climb into the cab together, because the road ahead hides more than shadows. There is a kind of tired that feels like a second person climbing into the cab and asking for the wheel. And that is the kind I hit just past midnight on an empty stretch between Laramie and Cheyenne, with black ice combing the lane lines into shine and the radio chattering about nothing. I had 3 more hours in my clock before my mandatory break, but the eyelid burn said otherwise, so I took the next rest area that appeared like a promise, a pale concrete station tucked off the interstate with 2 rows of truck slots, a bathroom building, a single vending machine that probably owed the world more Coca-Cola than it would ever pay back, and 4 sodium lamps giving the scene that orange insomnia color that makes everything look like a photograph of someone else's night. I backed into a slot, straightened the trailer, set the brake, and let the engine idle while the turbo cooled because habits out here keep you alive. The snow had stopped, the wind had not. It pushed across the open lot in steady muscle, rattling the fiberglass fairings, humming in the mirror housings, making the flags on the light poles hold their breath. I clicked the CBC over to 19 and heard 2 drivers 40 miles ahead warn about a spun-out pickup, then static, then that low, empty carrier someone holds down by accident when they roll on the mic and forget they are broadcasting white noise. I killed the dome light to see outside better and let my eyes adjust. The rest area was not empty. 3 trucks sat in the far row with curtains drawn, and a sedan idled nose in too far past the stop line like a person who has not learned where to put their anxiety. I decided to grab 10 minutes and a bathroom run, and then either nap in the chair or put the truck back in gear and let coffee do what faith could not. I grabbed my hoodie, locked the passenger door out of habit, opened my side, and dropped the 3 steps into the night. The cold cut the air down to a taste and gave the snow that squeaking sound under boots you only get with the right kind of wrong temperature. My breath looked like steam off a kettle. When I closed the door, the glass gave me my reflection in a sliver of the lot behind me, and for a second I thought I saw someone standing by the tree line past the last lamp, a shape cut out of the dark rather than standing in it. The kind of silhouette that makes your body react before you can narrate why. I turned to look straight on. Nothing stood there. Only the slight rise where plows throw the world to the edges, and a stand of saplings trying not to be a forest. You shrug off a lot to keep moving. I told myself my brain had pasted one of the light poles into a person because brains are lazy, zipped up, and headed for the building with my shoulders hiked without trying to. The bathroom door was the heavy institutional kind with a pull that makes you feel like you do not belong there, and the tile inside reflected the lights in a way that made the world look smooth. The hum of the vending machine in the foyer had a beat my heart tried to match until it gave up. I washed my hands too long because hot water makes a case for civilization, then stood at the industrial dryer while it bullied warm air over my knuckles and looked up at the wall-mounted security monitor. Somebody in the state had installed 4 cameras pointed at the lot and looped them into a single screen so bored troopers could zoom by and pretend to care. On camera 3, which had a view of my row from the far pole, a figure stood between my truck and the one next to it, too close to my passenger door for manners, an absence shaped like a person rather than a person cast by lights, as if someone had cut a trucker silhouette out of the video feed and left the whole upright. I leaned closer and told myself it was compression artifacts, called ghosting by people who like to name things, and ghosts by people who like to be right. Camera 2, from a different angle, had nothing in that spot. Camera 1, which watched the same row from the restroom building, caught a hint of the shape at the edge of frame, like it was respecting the border of real. I walked back to the lot fast enough to be halfway between polite and foolish. The spot by my passenger door was empty. Snow carried only my boot prints from the cab to the building and back. The wind made its own noise and asked for no witnesses. I told myself the 10-minute nap was the better plan. I climbed up, shut the door, locked it, then unlocked it because once is not enough when your nerves are writing policy. And I sat in the driver's seat with my shoulders finally unhooking from my ears. The cab dark felt like a warm pocket. The dash clock said the kind of numbers that make midnight feel broad, and the engine settled into that even tone a healthy diesel sings when it forgives you for being human. I closed my eyes and let the world shrink to the hum and the occasional flap of the passenger belt against the door. The flap stopped. A slow pressure pushed on the passenger door as if someone had leaned their shoulder into it just enough to be rude and not enough to be violent. The truck did not sway, but the rubber seal made a noise like breath caught and released. I opened my eyes and everything looked the same. I did not move because prey freezes when the brush whispers. The pressure eased. The belt knocked the door again twice and fell silent. I sat still until my heart let go of my throat, then turned on the dome light in one firm move to blind whatever I had decided was not there. Light filled the cab with its own authority and nothing occupied the passenger seat. On the passenger window, a faint crescent had appeared, where you could have pressed a forehead to the glass, fogged and already thinning, sized right for someone my height if they were tired of holding up their head. I do not scare easy. I do respect rules even when I do not know who is writing them. I reached for the air horn pull and gave the lot a single bray short enough to be scolding and long enough to be a warning. On the CB, a voice came back low and amused, the kind that belonged to a driver who has seen men get out of their own way too late. "You watching him or he watching you?" the voice asked. I clicked back and asked who is him. The line fizzed, and the voice said, "Depends on what the lights are doing," and cut out so clean I thought I had made it up. The sodium lamps humming across the row had settled into that flicker you can feel more than see, the kind they get when wind and cold split authority. Each buzz felt like someone clearing a throat. The orange light lifted and fell, and every time it dimmed, I thought I saw a darker patch hug the passenger side as if deciding whether to climb in. When the light steadied, nothing stood there. When they dipped, a shape tried to define itself like a photo in chemicals. I kept the dome on and watched my own reflection in the windshield, hat brim low, eyes doing that small, nervous dance people do when they lie to themselves about what matters. The glass put the lot and my face on the same surface, a collage that did not help. My plan was simple. Start the truck rolling, carry on to the next exit with caffeine, call this rest area a lesson in why 10 minutes cost more than fuel. I turned the key back to run, set the brake to off, nudged the stick, and felt the cab tip the way a rig does when weight shifts on springs. The brake hissed. The truck rocked once, a small hello from physics. In the upper corner of the windshield where the curve catches the night, a smudge formed below the black tint band as if something had tested the glass with 2 fingertips and decided it would hold. I wiped it with the back of my glove and left a clean arc through the fog. 2 faint, greasy oval prints remained, spaced the way human fingers are spaced when you do not trust the surface and want to keep your balance without committing your palm. I set the brake again because commitment did not feel wise, and I did what every driver who has a bad feeling does. I climbed out to walk the truck. Outside, it was colder by a degree that mattered. The wind changed its pitch when I stepped around the hood as if disappointed to have anything else to play with. I walked the grill, checked the airlines, pulled on the glad hand one extra time because that is a thing you can control when other things do not want to be named. When I turned the corner at the passenger side, the rest area looked smaller from ground level, more like a set than a place. Near the base of the door, where powder collects, a smear 2 inches wide and the length of a hand drifted in the snow, a darker line where pressure had melted flakes together and then backed off, like someone had slid their fingers down until the tips met the step and stopped. I looked out past the lamps to the trees and saw nothing. I looked at the far row, and the 3 sleepers were still, one generator clacking a lullaby for itself. I looked down and saw my boot prints in that one smear and felt the piece of my brain that likes order pack a bag and leave. Back in the building for a second look at the monitors, I told myself this was science and not ritual. The video loops had their same 4 angles. Camera 3 again showed my row as a miniature with grain and a weird wobble because the HDMI cable had aged poorly. Between my truck and the empty slot beside it stood a person-shaped block of not video, a cutout the image refused to fill, blacker than the absence of light a camera makes when it has nothing to offer. The figure faced the cab. I could tell because head and shoulders had that slight tilt to the right you get when you watch a driver's seat and expect movement. Camera 1 from the building showed a clean aisled line of trucks and painted spaces and nothing else. I waved at the lens like a fool to see myself on the screen, and camera 1 obliged, a small me in a bright hoodie, alone, while camera 3 insisted that something else kept me company. The vending machine hummed louder, or my head decided it did. I asked the room what rule I was breaking. No one answered except the heater under the sink that kicked on with a clack like a switchblade learning doctrine. There is a displeasure in leaving a thing behind you do not understand. There is also a price for staying to negotiate with it. I went back to the truck ready to pay for movement with one more embarrassment to my pride. As I crossed the lot, the wind shifted again like someone moved a wall I could not see. I climbed up, shut the door, locked both, and gave the dash a pat I do not admit to. I set the cab lights off and let the sodium wash own the interior. The windshield reflected the lamps and the ghost of the building behind me and my own face, and overlaid on all of that, softly, the darker shape at passenger height that the cameras loved. The shape did not have eyes. It had attention. You can feel attention when there are no eyes to carry it. My right hand slid to the shifter, left to the wheel, feet to the choreography that comes with leaving politely, and the shadow leaned, just enough to make the belt knock once, as if it had changed its mind about how to sit. I did not want that seat occupied by anything that learned from me. I pulled out slow, signaled, took the loop to the on-ramp with the caution of a man carrying nitro, and merged into a lane that looked like it had been ironed by the wind. Once back on the interstate, the truck breathed easier. The mirrors showed the rest area falling away behind like a lit island. The radio gave me the same two drivers still arguing about whether the pickup had caused its own troubles. In the passenger mirror, the shape rode where night rides. At the edge of the glass were reflection of shoulder, guardrail, and Skytrade places with the white logo on my trailer. Every time I checked, the spot where the lamp had put a highlight on the chrome showed a small, darker oval that stayed where my eye looked. I turned my head, and it was gone because human eyes make deals with night that cameras do not. I said out loud because the cab can hold confession better than a church, that if this thing wanted to come along, it could do it on the fuel I bought, but not on my seat. That sounds small. Out there, small rules keep you human. The belt did not knock again. The smudges on the windshield did not multiply. 10 miles on, I passed another rest area with only one tractor sleeping, and the urge to check if the monitors there would choose the same truth rose and slid away. The headlights swept a green sign for a 24-hour diner, and I told my stomach to be patient, because a line cook cannot cook superstition long enough to make it edible. I put on the radio talk channel and let strangers talk about basketball to fill the shape the shadow had made in the cab. In the next hour, the interstate leaned under us, and the truck did its animal work, and my body learned that keeping a thing in the mirror is not the same as carrying it. The shape returned once, just beyond the passenger glass, when we ran under a bridge that cut out the moon and the lamps flickered in sympathy. It pressed two faint ovals against the inside of the windshield near the tint band where my glove had cleaned earlier, and the prints did not match my glove. Then it lifted away as if remembering a rule we had not shared aloud. In Cheyenne, I fueled because normal chores steady your hands. Under the canopy lights with diesel on my fingers and the card reader asking for the same questions it always asks, I felt honest again. A kid in another lane washing his windshield with the long-handled squeegee glanced at my passenger door and frowned like he had seen someone and then shook his head like he had not. He walked over, looked at my tires and said, "Watch your right rear inner on the trailer. It looks soft." Then looked at the passenger window one more time as if getting double billed by his own brain. I thanked him and kicked the tire, and it sounded fine, because sometimes the person you help is yourself. He left, and a gust pushed through the canopy hard enough to make the pump hoses swing. The shadow did not like that wind. I could feel the cab lighten. I did not stop again until the dawn sketched Wyoming into color, and the road began to act like a place again rather than an idea. At a daylight rest area, I parked under big white lamps that clicked off one by one as the sun took work back from them. I got out, checked the passenger door, and found the faintest trace of oil from someone's fingers near the edge of the glass, the kind of print that looks like it will vanish if you blink with bad intentions. I wiped it with glass cleaner until the towel came away clean, and the smell of ammonia filled the cab like a new rule. In the bathroom, the monitors showed nothing but trucks and people, and a sedan full of tired visible in every angle. A trooper came in for coffee from the machine that claims to be humane and nodded at me. He had that look they get when they were new on nights and found out daylight makes all the things you do sound like stories, and he asked if I had a good night. I said I got my miles, and he said that is as much as anyone can ask, and then he paused with his cup halfway to his mouth and asked, "Did you stop at the one past Laramie with the wind? Because we have been getting calls." He did not say about what, and I did not answer about who. I said I do not use that one if I can help it. He nodded, like I had passed a course. I would like to tell you that was the only night the watcher found me, but the road does not give one lesson for free and leave you alone. A week later, on a different line through Nebraska, I slid off for a catnap, and under yellow lamps in a concrete rectangle by a field of winter stalks, I felt the same attention arrive like a coin placed on the tongue. The window fogged where no breath should be. The security monitor in the bathroom showed an empty lane and a shape beside my passenger door, only on the camera that faced diagonally across the lot. I did what I had learned. I respected the seat. I did not open the door for air. I moved when I could without panicking. In the mirrors, the edge of dark rode along until it found a bridge shadow to slip into. I wiped the prints when they appeared and told the glass cleaner bottle it was earning its keep. When I slept later, in full daylight on a gravel lot behind a co-op with a grain elevator ticking like a patient, I dreamed I was parked at the first rest area again, watching myself approach the truck carrying coffee with two hands while something stood at the passenger door and leaned in as if to hear me better, and I woke with my heart hammering and my hands gripping the steering wheel because sleep had put them there of its own. On the dash, someone had left a penny standing on its edge perfectly balanced between two dash panels. I do not perform parlor tricks for myself. I flicked the penny down, and it rolled toward the passenger door and fell into the track of the window with a sound like a small bell. If you want a rule to carry out of this, you can write it on a sticky note and leave it on your dash. Do not nap under bad sodium when the wind makes the lamps flicker. Do not ignore a monitor that shows you an absence shaped like you. Do not invite anything into the seat that has learned your rhythm. If you need the 10 minutes, take them under stadium lights or morning sun, or anywhere that shadows do not have the time to choose shapes. When you do your walk around and you see a smear by the passenger step like someone touched down to test the world, do not put your hand there to compare. When the belt taps a door that should not be touched, tell yourself out loud that you are not alone and that you are still the one who decides when the truck moves. If you hear a driver on 19 ask if you are watching him or he watching you, answer with a joke if you must, but roll. The watcher has patience and the road has more. There are stretches out here where the light made by men does not belong to men. On those nights I keep my cab clean, my glass clear, my seatbelt buckled and empty, and my mirrors honest. When the shape appears and tests the seal, I let the engine sing. I thank a person I cannot see for teaching me respect without asking for blood, and I take the interstate back like a door that I can still close. I was 6 hours deep into a westbound night with the wind knifing across the high plain and my rig leaning like a tired animal. I had 90,000 pounds of palletized cereal in a dry van that groaned when the gusts hit broadside. Channel 19 was mostly static, with the occasional warning about black ice laid down like glass between Rawlins and the Elk Mountain exit. The thermometer on the dash hovered just below freezing, and the kind of stars you only get in Wyoming punched through the windshield as if they knew they were the only decoration the world would offer me for the next 100 miles. I had been on the road long enough to forget what my apartment even smelled like. There is a place your mind goes when the white lines flicker under you like old film, a place that makes voices seem further than they are, and small things like a coffee lid becoming the center of your life. That is where I was when I saw her at the off-ramp. The exit sign had half its bulbs out, and the wind kicked snow across the asphalt in snakes that broke apart when they hit the shoulder. She stood under the bent green arrow, small and stubborn, hair blown wild out of a knit cap, denim jacket too thin for the night, a canvas backpack hooked on one shoulder with the strap twisted. She had her thumb out, but it was the posture that made me downshift and light the signal. She wasn't dancing around or bouncing from foot to foot like the high ones I had seen on the California line. She stood, like people stand when they have been waiting for a long time and decided to be dignified about it. I pulled onto the shoulder and my trailer rolled a little and moaned, and I told the wind to give me a break and it did not listen. I popped the passenger door and leaned across. "Need a ride?" I said, because there is only one way to start a story like this. She nodded and climbed the 3 steps quick, like she knew not to hang out in the lane, and when the door thunked shut, the cab felt a degree warmer and a lot more crowded. "You headed west?" she asked, even though the trailer told her that. "Salt Lake," I said. She said, "Can you drop me by marker 247?" And my mouth answered sure before my brain had time to file the question. In Wyoming, the markers climb and fall with the state line, and the last time I had looked, I thought those numbers were long behind. She pointed her chin and said, "It is just past the white fence," and went quiet like that was all the orientation necessary. For the first few miles, her breath came out in little puffs until the heater finally cut through the cold she had stitched to her jacket. She did not smell like cigarettes or wet wool. She smelled like air that had been outside too long and had learned to be stubborn. "I asked you got a name because I am a man who dislikes putting the wrong kinds of silence in a truck." She said Mia and looked out the side window like the median mattered to her more than the cab did. I told her mine because names at night on the interstate are like bolts threaded into the same piece of steel. She smiled at that, and when she did, it pulled slightly more on one side. Not a flaw, a habit. She had old-fashioned manners and modern eyes. She buckled the belt without me asking and set the backpack between her feet and kept her hands on her knees like she was in church. She watched the road the way drivers watch the road even when they are riding, which told me she had spent time in motion and did not trust anything that claimed to be steady. I offered coffee and she shook her head. I asked where she had come from and she gave me a town that the state had smoothed over with a new overpass and a name that had been painted over 3 times. I said I had not seen that sign in years. She said you saw it tonight, and the way she said it made my neck prick. The CB popped, and a voice warned of a wrecked cattle hauler stacked up near Arlington with a trooper waving traffic to a single lane. I dropped gears and eased through the drift that gathered in the wind shadow of the big orange barrel. We rolled past the wrecker lights and the smell of hot metal and the splintered fence, and she stared straight ahead the way people do when they do not want a thing they have seen to take root. We cleared the mess, and the dark got deeper and the heater whined at my ankle and the tires sang on the grooved ice with that high tone that means you are very alive. She did not speak until we passed the Chute Creek sign where the land dips and a stand of leafless cottonwoods pretend to be a forest in a place trees should have the good sense to avoid. "That is where it happened," she said, and I understood she was not talking about the cattle hauler. You can ask a question 2 ways, the kind that pries and the kind that hands a person a step if they want to climb to it. I tried for the second. "The bridge," she said. "It went out 2 springs ago and the county patched a detour with cold mix that fell apart in a week. A pickup went over under a sky that insisted it was clear. The county does not admit it in so many words," she added like a lawyer, "because admitting has a cost even when the creek keeps the secret." "That was not 2 years ago," I said before I could stop myself. She cocked her head in that sorry way people offer when they will let you be wrong without enjoying it. "The mile marker," she said. "Please do not miss it." Then she reached into the pocket of her jacket and took out a folded paper map, like the kind gas stations used to sell in a rack. It was creased and soft and marked in pen with a circle around a little finger road that curled off the interstate, like an old thought. She set it on my lap without looking at me, and went back to watching the right lane. The pen circle looked like a place someone had traced 300 times while deciding whether to go there. She was not chatty, and she was not scared. She did not ask me about the life, about how many miles on the odometer or which truck stops have the good showers. She did not tell me a story about getting dumped or needing to get to a man or escaping one. The quiet in the cab felt less like absence and more like the pause between a question and the answer a teacher knows you already have, if you sit still long enough to admit it. We climbed a grade and held 80,000 like gentlemen, and the wind shoved at the trailer, and I leaned into it and pressed just enough throttle to keep the engine from lugging. At 2:47, she lifted a finger like a conductor and said, "There." My headlights caught a white plank fence where the right-of-way bulged a little and a small turnout of packed dirt. I flipped the signal and eased onto it, and my trailer brakes sighed, and the noise of the highway filled the world the way it always does when you stop and realize how much sound speed makes that you do not notice while you are being carried by it. I reached for the shifter to put us in neutral, and when I looked back at the passenger seat, she was gone. No door opened. No cold rushed in. The belt lay slack against the seat. The backpack was still on the floor. For 2 heartbeats, I thought she had dropped into the footwell, and my brain began to invent medical problems to solve because adrenaline likes to come with tasks. Then I understood the cab was empty, and I had been alone since Rollins and I had not. The map lay on my lap, and a small edge of paper had torn under my thumb, where I must have held it too tight. I told myself I had fallen for one of those stories old hands talk about in the chrome under bad lighting. I told myself I had nodded off and dreamed her into my truck, and I looked at the clock and remembered every mile of the last hour, and my knuckles were white on the wheel. I picked up the backpack because something about leaving the only thing of hers in that seat felt wrong on a scale I did not have numbers for. It was light, as if it held its shape out of loyalty rather than weight. Inside was a folded flannel shirt, a small locket on a chain, and a note that said "thank you" in a hand that pushed the pen hard like the letters had to be nailed down. The locket was old and warm from the fabric around it, and the hinge caught my fingernail. Inside was a photo no bigger than a stamp, a girl with the same knit cap and a dog with that cocked head that tells you the person holding the camera is loved by the animal. The other half of the locket was empty. There are choices you can make in a life, and there are obligations you discover when choices turn out to be decorations for stories you are not actually writing. I took the map and the locket and the thank you, and I put the flannel in the sleeper, because something in me said, do not let it sit in the wind where it will smell like someone else's yard. I climbed down, and my boots sank half an inch into packed snow, and the cold found every place the heater had failed to push away from my skin. The fence was nothing. It was boards on posts with paint scabbed off by years of wind. On the other side, the land rolled down into dark that tried to pretend it was just farther night. The wind set the boards humming, and the sound matched the pitch of my nerves. Off to the right, where the old road must have gone when local traffic wanted to pretend the interstate had not stolen its center, there was a low place where the snow looked different, not drifted, fallen gentler, as if there was nothing underneath it to catch. I shined my flashlight at that low place, and the beam went dull like a hand over a mouth. A shape under the snow suggested a broken edge. My heart threw one hard punch to my ribs that made me whisper an apology to anything listening for my sudden belief in it. Back in the cab, I sat with both hands on the wheel without turning the key and listened to the wind try windows that had nothing to offer it. There are plenty of stories out here, and most of them have been exaggerated and shaved down in exactly the wrong places by men who were drunk or lonely or both. There are few that come when you are sober and retired from both those excuses, doing your job and trying not to spook the new guy on the two-way with talk of the old grade that eats brakes. I was not drunk and I was not lonely, and I had a locket in my hand that did not belong to me. I started the engine, checked my mirrors the way I check them when I am the kind of driver who will not get fired for being the kind of driver who gets fired, and I pulled back onto the interstate with the map folded on the passenger seat like a consent form. The cab smelled like cedar from the flannel and something colder riding underneath it, and I cannot explain that to you if you have not smelled it yourself. There are airs that stick to a thing the way a story sticks to a place when the county's paperwork says it should be clear. From 247 to the first westbound runaway ramp, there is a stretch that does not seem like much on paper. A long, slow descent with a wind that tries to make you generous with your brakes until the grade surprises you by steepening, and a bend that looks honest until you understand the plow carved a shoulder where once there had been more lane. I have taken it 100 times, and I have done it right and wrong, and until that night the wrong had never been expensive. The map had a finger trace from the marker to a little circle drawn in blue ink where someone had written, "Hold third gear," and then in smaller letters, "Trust me." I have trusted worse advice. I dropped to third. The engine wound up and the Jake brake started its growl and the trailer wiggled just enough to remind me we were tall and not a toboggan, and the crosswind hit, and I held it and watched the mirrors and talked to the truck, the way a man talks to an animal that has earned it. At the bend, the surface looked wet. It was not wet. It was a strip of glass laid down by a day of sun and a night of temperature that had decided to make men honest. My right foot twitched and my left hand tapped the shifter like a metronome, and if I had been in fourth and in a mood to ride the pedal, I would have learned the lesson that makes a name out of a ramp. The trailer slid 1 inch and came back, and my heart ran through all its names for love and hate at once. Then I saw the ramp. I had always thought of those sand-filled lanes as things for other drivers with heavier feet and lighter heads. That night it looked like a hand. The map's blue circle sat in my lap like a signature. The girl who had not ridden in my truck pointed again from the seat that was empty, and my tires found the pit. The world went to grainy noise under me, and the whole rig plowed up that hill like a bull getting tired, and I could feel the heat of friction through steel. When we topped and tilted and stopped, it was so quiet I realized I had not actually heard quiet in months. I sat with my hands warm from adrenaline, and my mouth dry and the dash light washing my knuckles pale. The locket lay on my thigh, and I had no story left to tell myself that made me the author of any part of the last 5 minutes. A trooper pulled up behind me in a white SUV with a bar that only pretends not to be a smile and a face that had seen too many men make poor choices on that stretch. He climbed to my door and I opened it before he could tap, because I wanted a human voice on this night, and a ticket would be part of the price if that is what it took. He looked at my front tires, sunk to the axle, and let out a breath through his teeth the way mechanics do when you bring them something that could have gone either way. "You ride the ramp because you meant to?" he asked. I said because someone drew me a map. He looked at the paper. He pointed at the locket with his chin because he was not putting a finger on anything tonight that was not attached to a form. "That yours?" he asked. I said no. He nodded like I had told him that the sky was black. He said, "You know about the girl." I did not answer because there are ways to say yes that feel like a promise you are not ready to make. He tapped the map circle and said, "I have seen that exact scribble for 20 years without understanding where it comes from." He stepped back and told me to sit tight while he called the wrecker. Sit tight is a phrase lawmen use when they think the world might try to move you, and they want you to pretend it is choice that keeps you put. At the tow yard, they poured gravel out of my brakes, and the man who did it whistled low in a way that was not music. I got a room at the kind of motel that knows truckers by first names and pretends not to, and I showered until the mirror stopped looking like a film of someone else. The locket sat on the sink, and the girl and her dog looked up at me as if I had done my chores properly. I opened my phone and searched by the creek name and the county and the word accident, and found a photo of a cross made of old cedar with a name burned into it, and a small pile of stones at the base that people had left when they ran out of words to stack. The name matched the initials carved inside the locket hinge. The date did not match the girl's 20-something face in the picture. It was older. It belonged to a storm I was a child for. The article was short and careful. It mentioned flooding. It mentioned county crews. It did not mention blame. I did not sleep, and I did not try to, because some sleep makes you dead in the morning. In the bright of late morning, the stretch of road where I had been held up looked as ordinary as a parking lot after the fair leaves. Men in fluorescent vests tamped what needed tamping, and a wrecker carried someone else's mistake away, and the blue of the sky insisted things like last night belonged to myth. I drove to the mile marker and pulled onto the shoulder where the white fence buzzed gently and the land fell away into the old road suggestion. I took the locket and the map and the thank you and the flannel, and I climbed the fence and walked down the gentle roll until the snow told the truth with its slant, and I stopped because my weight on the edge of a memory did not feel like a kindness. I tucked the locket chain through a crack in the uppermost board, and I weighted it with a small stone because the wind out here eats stories as readily as it tells them. I folded the map and slid it under the edge of a board, where the wood had thinned in a way someone who has lived in the same place for too long recognizes as tiredness. I kept the flannel because a thing that has warmed a body belongs to the living. When I climbed back over, the wind took a little of the careful out of my caution, and I dropped hard on my heel, and the earth answered with a hollow thump that sounded like a string you did not know your guitar had. I went on with my road. That is what you do. You take your miles and earn your money and deliver the cereal and pretend a kid in Boise needs breakfast more than you need explanation. But after that night, the interstate changed its face for me. The ramps looked like decisions, not engineering. The snow fences were sentences written by men who understood wind when most of us only feel it. At every big grade, I checked for an empty seat that was not empty. At the Wade and Clark scales, a kid on the CB joked about spooks in the ditch, and I did not laugh because the ditch seems like a mouth until you see it become one, and then you do not joke at mouths. At a Love's near Evanston, an old driver with a beard that had learned to be coffee-proof watched me hold the door for no one and asked if I had picked her up. I said I did not pick anyone up and my mouth was a liar. He nodded anyway and said she keeps a lot of us in the lane we are supposed to be in. He said a southbound jackknifed on the grade in 99, and a trooper found the driver walking uphill toward the ramp with his hands in front of him, like a man expecting to hit something, and the driver kept repeating thank you to a person who was not there. The old man's eyes were not spooky and not dramatic when he told me this. They were tired in the way that means a story has been carried long enough to be part of the spine. Weeks later, I was eastbound in clear air on the same stretch with a lighter load and an easier heart, and I saw her again at the same exit. There are nights when you should not change a thing that is working, and there are nights when you must pick up what is set down for you. Because failure to do so makes you a person you will hate when the noise stops. I pulled over and opened the door, and she climbed in with a nod, like she had rode with me yesterday. She did not ask for 247 because we were pointed the other way. She said, "Do not take Ridgecut," and I almost laughed because that spur had been closed 5 winters ago. She said it anyway, and her voice had layers of warning that matched no map. I asked if she needed the locket, and she said you put it where it keeps the fence honest, and her voice did not soften so much as become a tool for a job done right. Then she did a thing that belongs to the young when they trust a little too soon. She closed her eyes. It was not a long rest. It was not a collapse. It was the sort of letting go you do when you have been carrying a thing down a hill and someone finally puts the tailgate down on a truck and you can stop pretending you are not shaking. Her mouth moved as if she was counting on her fingers in her pocket. When we hit the long straight, I watched her shoulders lift with mine when the gusts pushed. Just past the Sinclair overpass, she opened her eyes and said, "Exit here." It was not my exit. It had a small services sign that pretended to promise more than the little gas station could deliver. I put the blinker on because my nervous system knew more than my routing did. At the bottom, the cross street was lit by one street lamp that had seen kinder days, and under it a kid stood with his thumb out. He could not have been older than 19, with a too-big jacket he had inherited from a man who ate more than he could, and shoes that had not learned to be waterproof. He looked scared and not at all surprised to be looked at by a man in a semi. He looked at the girl in my cab, and then he did not, because he did not see her. She said, "Do not stop," and I did not, and my spine prickled with the memory of the fence's hum. When the kid was in the mirror and the sign for the ramp was half a mile away, she said, "Stop now," in a tone that pulled at something under my ribs. I stopped on the shoulder where the lights off the highway do not quite give you everything you want. She reached for the door handle and pressed it without opening, and I could not tell if it was habit or ceremony. Then she looked right at me for the first time and said, "When the grade takes your brakes, you do not panic. You ride your gear and take the hand they built for you." And I said, I had done that, and she said, "Then you will do it again, because you will live long enough to forget and need the reminder." She put her hand on the dash like a thank you, and there was no weight to it, and I still felt it. Then she was not there. The seatbelt swung once and settled. The smell of cedar did not leave. I did not sleep at the stop that night. I drove and I watched, and I bled off speed properly, and I took the ramp a mile later even though I did not need it, because sometimes doing a thing when it is easy teaches your body to do it when it is not. The next morning at a diner with new chrome, pretending to be old chrome, an officer with a mustache that made him look like he belonged to one of my father's stories sat 2 stools down and asked what I hauled. He did not ask about ghosts, because officers do not. He said, "Be careful on the grade east of Laramie, because the state had done a mess of temporary patching." He said, "Do not look at the crosses too long when you pass them, because they are for the living and not the dead." He paid and left, and in the reflection of the window, I saw the empty stool next to me, filled by a person not there until I turned, and the stool was just a stool, and the waitress set down my plate like none of this would ever end. Do I believe in her? I believe in the way my truck feels when it is being watched by something that wants me to be careful. I believe in the small indent in the passenger seat cushion that was not there before the night at 2:47. I believe in the locket on the fence and the way the chain rang in the wind when I hooked it over the board. I believe in the map I kept a copy of, because gas stations do not sell them anymore, and a GPS does not know how to warn you about what a county will not admit to in a meeting. I believe in the girl with the knit cap, because I have driven long enough to know there are debts out here, and some of them get collected kindly. If you drive this stretch and you see someone standing under a broken sign with a jacket too thin for the night and a posture that says she has been waiting for longer than any bus line has been scheduled, stop if you want. Do not if you do not. But if you go past mile marker 247 westbound, drop a gear and let your engine sing and keep your foot off the pedal. If the ramp comes and looks like a hand, take it. The highway will forgive you for being cautious. The dead forgive less easily. When I crest a ridge now, I talk out loud, not to fill space and not to pretend I am not alone, but to make sure the part of me that wants to be foolish is not driving. Sometimes the cab smells like cedar, when there is no reason for it, and sometimes the belt clicks like a seat is being taken, and sometimes the CB crackles, and a young voice says, "Hold third," and the hair on my arms finds the wind, and I hold third because I have learned that trust is not a foolish thing when it has already saved your life once. There is a story men tell at truck stop counters about a vanishing hitchhiker that is supposed to be funny in the way near misses are when you are morning full and the coffee is strong. They always make the driver bravado and the ghost a prank. That is not this story. This one is about a person who did not have the luxury of being finished when the county poured the wrong mix, and about the driver she has kept from making the grade into an altar. It is about a ramp that looks like a hand and a fence that hums in the wind, and a map drawn in blue pen that shows you where to tell your pride to sit quietly and let your training do the work. When you are out there at 2 a.m. and the white lines flicker like old film and you start to think you are the only creature that exists between the buttes and the stars, listen hard. If you hear someone say, "Do not take Ridgecut even though it is closed," or you smell cedar in a place that should smell like diesel and coffee, tighten your belt and remember that living long is not a story you get to tell if you will not let anyone else help you tell it. I do not leave the passenger door locked on that stretch anymore. I do not wait to learn lessons with my bumper. When the wind comes down off Elk Mountain and makes my trailer lean, I lean back and I say out loud that I am listening. Somewhere near 247, a girl with a knit cap keeps walking the shoulder of a road that is not there anymore. When the air in my cab shifts and the seatbelt clicks and the heater picks up like it must share the work of warming more than one set of hands, I tell her she is safe and heard and that the ramp is still where the map says it is. Then I do exactly what she told me to do, and I get to live with it. I was pulling west out of Kearney with a full box of dry groceries and a schedule that made sense only to dispatch software when the CB started acting like a bad dream. Channel 19 open and quiet in that warm way a working radio hums until a carrier steps on it with a breath that is not yours. The night had that December shellac that makes a windshield feel like a pain between worlds, and the wind pushed low from the north, steady, patient, teaching the trailer how to skate if I gave it the wrong cue. I had been running 11 on, and my eyes burned enough to insist I find a shoulder or a lighted square by 2 a.m. The voice came at 1:18, while the mile markers counted down Nebraska like a rosary. Left lane now. It was not a request. I flicked the signal without thinking and eased over. The right lane flashed white in my headlights and gave up a blown recap, exhaling metal cords and rubber like a split eel. If I had been straddling it, my steer would have taken a bite no shop could cure on the shoulder in that cold. Before I could thank the ether, the voice came again with no handle to pin to it. Back when the lights change after the overpass, I asked who am I talking to and got that whispery carrier hiss and a single word that made my neck itch: awake. I told myself it was a prank or some local repeater bouncing a faithful echo from a guy up the road who had eyes I did not. Then the voice said my name like it was reading it off the bills of lading and reminded me my father called me shortstop when I was 10 and tried out for a team too serious for my age. Nobody on 19 knew that. Nobody in this century should have. I should have killed the set and let the radio die a quiet death until daylight. But drivers live half on superstition and half on the willingness to let a stranger keep you alive. So I kept the squelch where it was and listened, ready to pretend I had not. At the state line, the road turned to glass in that small curve you forget is a curve because the plow had polished it like a trophy. Slow to 45. Do not touch the pedal. The voice folded into the static like it had always been there, and the microphone in my hand felt warm in that way plastic holds a little human heat after it has been used. I downshifted and let the Jake speak, stage 1, then 2, and the trailer settled into the line like a kid who recognized the right sidewalk. A mile later, brake lights bloomed red across both lanes, and a pickup pirouetted once mid-span before stopping neatly on the shoulder without understanding the gift it had been given. I rolled by at a speed that felt like a prayer and did not key up because anything I said would have been stupid. By Sydney, the voice had told me to stop pretending I could run the way station with the closed sign half lit because there was a dot car idling in the median. And sure enough, the sign looked asleep and the ramp looked easy, and the trooper waited just past the merge like a fisherman who knows a pool has secrets. Pull in. Right now. Top step on your tractor, fifth wheel looks dry. I laughed at the absurdity of a radio diagnosing a latch from 50 feet away through steel and air, and still, I listened. On the ramp, the air felt thicker, like wind had given way to another pressure. I rolled into the bay, and a kid with a beard he had been trying to grow since he was 14 waved me onto the green lights, then frowned at the axle numbers and told me to park it for a look, even though the screen said he did not need to. He ducked under the trailer and came out with a look he thought was professional, and that age turns kind. Your latch was not all the way home. Could have been a bump. Could have been cold. Could have been the last guy who dropped this box did not kiss it right. I said thank you and pretended I had known all along, and when I got back in the cab, the CB keyed itself without my hand, and the voice said, "Check your passenger glad hand for a hairline." And when I reached, I felt the brittle place that air could chew through by Wyoming, and I swapped the line with a spare, fingers burning and forgiving me for being human. The stretch from Cheyenne to Laramie is not long in miles, but wind installs angles there you do not see on maps, and the night did that trick it does where nothing exists except what the high beams frame, and everything ends 30 yards ahead, your cab a small world and your eyes the only currency spendable inside it. On 19, a pair of cowboys from Montana discussed a load of hay in terms that made it sound like it had a personality. Then a dead space. Then the voice again like a coin dropped in a well. Mile 334, right lane, broken surface. Take the left and do not hug the rail. I did exactly that and rolled past a patch of Noah's own washboard that would have made my palletized cereal angry enough to shift and punish me for miles. I keyed and asked for a handle or a location and got a story instead. Keep your nose clean. It was exactly how my father said it when I stole his pocket change and lied about it, and he wanted me to grow up into a man who chose better. He never drove a truck. He owned a shortwave he tuned like a priest tunes prayer and spent storm nights listening to people's voices jump the weather and land in our kitchen. He had been dead 6 years, and he never said a word through my CB until a winter night when I was too tired to be proud. I started to test it because men like me get scared of the feeling of being helped and think a small insult to the gods is the same as staying in charge. I left my lights high too long after I had the road to myself, and the voice said, "Ease it down now because a four-wheeler is sitting dark past the next rise," and I killed the brights, and a tail light appeared where there had been nothing, and I forgave myself for pride. I waited 10 minutes to see if it would come back, and it did. Not always with heroics. sometimes with small truths that made the miles gentler. Single axle trooper in the next median. Moose on the shoulder by 9 Mile Creek. Dirty scale house and echo using infrared this week. Do not pretend you did not hear. A detour around a jackknifed reefer where the wind poured off Elk Mountain in sheets you could feel on your fillings. I started to talk to it like a dog that will not ride up front, no matter how you pat the seat. The voice rarely answered directly, and when it did, it told me nothing about itself. When I asked where it was keyed from, it said from the side that stands outside time. When I asked what it wanted, it said for you to keep going. When I asked if it was my father, it said no and managed to make the word feel like a kindness. The one personal detail it let slip came sideways. Do not go through Park City tonight. The wind will catch you in that curve where the overpass shoulders are thin, and dispatch will not appreciate the paperwork, and the county will not appreciate the mess, and the ski people will call you names they have never earned. It sounded like a person who had been called those names. Not with malice, but with that blank, rich impatience that makes decent men mean. I took the Beltway instead and arrived with a sense that I had not been tricked so much as spared. All night, through frozen Wyoming and into Utah's fewer lights, I moved on instructions delivered between a breath and a spark. The radio turned into a religion I did not agree to but could not leave. Other drivers did not hear it. Twice I relayed a warning and they thanked me and called me driver like we all do, and then asked how I saw that elk before it decided to be a rock. I said I got lucky and they believed me because luck is a thing men will admit into their lives faster than grace. In Echo Canyon I saw a set of eyes out in the sage, and the voice said it is only a coyote who has got it into his head that headlights are souls. And I laughed out loud for the first time in days because something with humor had found me on Channel 19 and chosen my cab as a place to perch. Humor did not make it a friend. The first time it reprimanded me was at 2:07 in the morning in a patch of fog east of Evanston that had slumped into the road like a spill nobody claimed. I took the center of my lane and let the road talk. The voice came clean and sharp enough to cut. Keep your hands at 9 and 3 and stop thinking about you. I bristled at that because fatigue turns honest criticism into insult, and I keyed to tell it where to go. Do not test me tonight. Words are only useful if you have time to apologize, and you do not. I shut up. A minute later, an empty cattle pot materialized at 20 miles an hour in the left lane without lights. If I had been arguing, I would have been explaining the crash to a highway patrolman who would not believe a story about a ghost and a warning and a voice that did not have a return address. I breathed in and out and said thank you, and for once the CB hissed like it had heard and accepted. At Colville, the way station lights were dark and the sign said closed, and the ramp looked like a promise a tired man would be stupid to keep, and the voice said, go in anyway. You are heavy on your spread and the county intends to be a hero at 4 in the morning. I went up the ramp and the bay fluorescents came on like I had tripped them with my guilt. A man in a sweatshirt that said Trojans in a font from 1998 walked out rubbing his eyes and waved me over and told me to unhook and weigh the trailer alone. And I did, and the numbers made the math I knew in my bones tell me I was right, but the ticket said otherwise, and he waved his hand and said, I am giving you this, and you are going to go move one pallet because a pallet is the only god out here anyone respects, and his tone made me move it, and I drove away angrier and safer in equal measure. The radio did not crow about being right. It did not seem to enjoy anything except the idea of motion continuing. What made me stop asking if it was a trick was Donner. I had dropped in from Reno a dozen times, and every time it spun the same white thread through me. That grade has its own souls and its own rules, and California puts signs on it that will keep a man alive if he remembers he is not special. It was snow that night, the way only Donner knows how to snow, tight and hard and insistent. And the plows ran their pace, and men who had not slept tried to keep up. I pulled into the chain control turnout and set iron like a man doing penance for every easy mile in Nevada. My hands went to stone and woke again when the heater did its good work. Eastbound I kept third and let the engine sing, and the line of taillights ahead of me looked like religion. The voice kept cadence not with poetry, but with math. 2.5 to the brake check. Do not drop to 4th, and do not be a hero. See that reefer ahead of you with the busted clearance light? He is about to get brave. Back off now. I did, and the reefer did that little dance men do when they think the curve is a suggestion, and then he found humility, and I let him have it without adding my bumper to his lesson. Near Soda Springs, the voice went a place inside me no stranger should know. 8 years ago on a Saturday, you let your phone ring out while you were checking a strap because you had been taught not to get careless with the lines. The call was from your father, borrowed from a nurse named Elena, because the heart is a machine, and sometimes it needs a tool you have to be invited to hold. You did not call back for 5 minutes because you wanted to be the kind of man who finished the strap. You have forgiven yourself for that call, and you never will. My hands went cold inside warm gloves. The CB crackled like something had leaned closer. I said, "Who are you?" The voice said, "Not your father and not your conscience and not a ghost anyone lit a candle for. I am traffic and weather and the part of the road that learned your name because you put enough miles on it to earn one." It did not make sense. It made too much. Past Sacramento, the night thinned and the voice fell away. For 3 days I heard nothing but men being men on the radio and music that sounded tired from trying to keep people awake. I convinced myself I had dreamed the pieces I could not prove. Then it returned where I did not need it, on a flat black stretch of I-84 eastbound near La Grande. No wind, no snow, no reason to have a helper at all. Channel 17. Now. The first thing you learn is fools play with channels, and you do not let them make rules about your cab. But the way it said "now" took choice out of my fingers. I clicked up to 17, and the set caught a voice with my shape on it. "Left lane now." The truck that voice was talking to went over and avoided a recap that could have bit his steer. The words the stranger used were mine, the same cadence, the same plain salt, and the driver on the other end said, "Thanks, driver," like we all do, and nobody marveled at the neatness of time. My throat went dry because my CB carried my voice to someone else through a pocket in the air that did not belong to that hour. I stayed on 17, and the world went quiet again. Then 19 lit up with the unknown voice with my father's advice and my own tone, braided into something I had no blueprint for. By the time I hit Emigrant Hill, the grade everyone calls cabbage, the voice was counting like a metronome. "Back to 3rd here. Stage 2 on. Fan it once for heat, but do not ride it. A trooper sits cold on the next ramp and his name is Wyatt, and he will wave at you with 2 fingers because he respects men who respect physics. A man in a blue Peterbilt with flames painted stupid on his hood will be going too hard and will listen to you if you speak at him like you do not think he is a fool. Key, now." I dropped to 17 and said Blue Pete with flames hauling white refrigerated through the right lane behind a red Cascadia, "Take it down a gear before the next curve." He came back quick and scared, asked how I knew about the curve, almost laughed at the idea a curve deserved a prophecy. Then I heard his engine brake climb and his trailer stiffen its spine, and he lived through the next 2 miles without making the news. I slid back to 19, shaking not from the grade, but from the sense that the air had decided I was both sides of a warning, the receiving and the sending. And the only difference between the two was whether I had earned the right to open my mouth. The voice did not congratulate me. It waited until I was on the flats and said, "Pull into the turnout with the broken picnic table and kill the engine. You need to hear something that lives better in silence." I did as told because obedience is a survival trait once it has saved you twice. The engine ticked down hot, and the night pressed in without the radiator's song. The CB carried that low, alive hiss all radios make when they are hungry and honest. The voice came soft enough that the speaker had to lean to catch it. There are places where lanes cross and times fold and voices ride like they always did when your father tuned the shortwave and borrowed storms for company. There are nights when you're mile marker and someone else's lineup for no good reason, and if you speak at the right second, your words go both ways, and your responsibility doubles. You have been saved 6 times since Kearney. You owe 6 you have not paid. The numbers did not feel like a threat. They felt like a ledger in neat hand. I asked why me, and the voice made a sound that was not a laugh and not a sigh. Because you listen. If this were a story with a clean ending, I would tell you I found the radio's back panel scratched with my father's initials, or a date from a pileup I escaped, and that I sent it back to the pawn shop with a note and a prayer, and it shut up and left me alone. It is not that kind of story. The mic does not belong to my father. The radio is a cheap Uniden with a thumbwear that could belong to any driver who grips too hard while he crosses Kansas with a schedule that punishes pride. The voice comes when it wants and chooses its nights like a man chooses where to stop for pie. It tells me left lane now, and I obey. It tells me stage 2 here, and I obey. It tells me to key on 17 for a man who thinks the curve will not cheat him, and I key and let words that sound like mine go into a future or a past and help him keep his paint off the rail. Sometimes it goes quiet for a week, and I start to believe I imagined the whole damn thing until the wind changes in Wyoming and the static tastes like pennies, and I hear "keep your nose clean" said in a tone my bones know, and I straighten my back and stop doing stupid things with a phone and a sandwich. I have not tried to track it back to a tower or a dying battery or an atmospheric skip with a chart, because the explanation will not change the work. At night, when 19 hisses and a ghost of a carrier leans in, I keep my hand near the mic and my mind near the numbers on the posts, and I behave like a man whose hearing might keep someone else's kids from growing without him. If you catch a voice through the noise that says your name right and sees past the next bend and calls you awake without calling you a fool, answer enough to let it know you are listening, and then do what it asks if what it asks is small and sane. On the nights when the air opens and you feel your words fall through and rise in someone else's cab, give them the plain truth you were given. If you are the kind who needs to name a thing to obey it, call it traffic and weather and mercy. If you are the kind who wants to fight being helped, pull over and look at your fifth wheel latch and your glad hand lines and tell yourself you did that because you are a professional. I am a trucker, and my radio talks to me when the sky is right and the wire hums, and somewhere a man I do not know rides too hard into a curve he cannot see. When the voice says, "Now I say now" to someone else, and the miles keep paying out their narrow salary of daylight and safe exits and coffee that tastes like work. If you hear me some night and I tell you left lane now, please do not ask who I am. I am awake. That is enough. By midnight, the interstate had emptied into a long ribbon of cold, and the glow of my dash felt like a small campfire in a country nobody wanted anymore. And that is when dispatch pinged a late ad with an address on the far edge of town that my GPS chewed twice before pretending to know. After hours drop, leave on dock 3, paperwork in office, lumper fee pre-approved, call if questions, the message said, and the phone number under it rang to a mailbox that had not heard a human voice since the last recession. I rolled off at a cracked exit that took me through an industrial park full of dead signs and weeds tall enough to draft in the wind. My headlights washed over a wall of corrugated steel with a faded logo I could not read, dock doors like eyelids pulled halfway down, a chain-link gate standing open to nothing. The place looked empty the way a mouth looks empty when the breath has been held too long. I idled past a burned-out yard goat and a stack of blue pallets slick with frost and lined up for dock 3 because the only working light on the whole block stood over it like a last idea. The green dock light blinked once as if noticing me, then steadied. The placard over the door said, "Door 03" in paint that had managed to survive wind, and the yellow paint on the bumpers looked fresh where everything else looked tired. I set up the back end with my mirrors and the slow language of the wheel that comes from too many nights like this, pulled the trailer square to the rubber seal, touched the ICC bumper and let the truck give that soft sigh that means it finally got to stop. I set the brake, killed the marker lights, chalked the wheels on principle, and reached for the dock lock rope out of habit, then froze because the lock had already grabbed, a steel hook biting my ICC bar with a clunk I felt through the frame. The red light flipped on without my hand on the switch. The rubber seal around the door pressed in on my trailer skin, and for a second the pressure on the box sounded like a long, slow exhale. I told myself it was wind caught in a shape it liked. The air smelled like wet cardboard and copper. I climbed out, walked back with a flashlight, and saw the dock leveler on its own hinge rise a hair like a cat on a windowsill. No one stood at the control panel. The office window set above the dock lane held a corkboard with plastic sleeves and a swinging chain for a pen, and a sign that asked drivers to sign in and print neatly. The sheet on the clipboard already had my name at the bottom in my own ugly block letters with the timestamp I could see on my watch. I touched the paper and the ink smudged like it had been written seconds ago. The camera dome above the office sent back my reflection in a rolling gray that made faces look soft. I pushed the buzzer for the office door because rules make people feel sane. The buzzer answered with a tone that made my teeth hurt, and the maglock clicked like a patient letting go of a secret. Inside the office, everything was older than it should have been. A beige CRT monitor asleep over a steel desk. A wall calendar pinned to 3 years ago on the month with a warehouse cat in a Santa hat. A pot of pens that had lost their caps and dyed the bottom black. The computer woke when I touched the keyboard. The login screen did not ask for a password. It rolled directly to a shipping screen with my bill number already up. It showed my company, my trailer number, my commodity, and a note that read, "Unload to floor staging Bay C. Do not stack higher than shoulder." And the word shoulder made me swallow because somewhere a person had typed that on a night when that rule made sense, and tonight there was no person. I cracked the trailer doors because pretending you did not hear a building breathe is easier if you keep working, and cold air flooded the hole between the rubber seals in my box. The dock plate rose smooth with a hydraulic sound and settled on my floor without anyone touching the controls. I stepped into the box with my flashlight and listened. The sound of empty cardboard on wood moves is different from the sound of anything else. It has a dry applause to it. I heard it now, a soft shifting 2 bays down where the light did not reach, as if pallets were finding the right to lean. I wrapped the handle of my pallet jack against the deck like a man telling a dog not to come closer. It echoed down the row of doors in a way that made the building sound deeper than it was. I moved the first pallet to the threshold, and the plate dipped to accept it like a tongue tasting a spoon. I pushed it onto the dock and staged it under the number C stenciled at my feet, and when I turned back for the second pallet, the first had slotted itself a foot to the left, with its twin tight beside it like soldiers who had understood a new order. I told myself the floor was not level, and that gravity and stiction had conspired to make the world feel haunted. As I dragged the second pallet toward daylight, the dock light flicked from red to green and back to red like an eye squeezing shut, and the lock clacked twice in small adjustments like a person setting their jaw. Somewhere farther inside, a forklift backup alarm beeped 3 times from a place the echo could not fake, and then stopped like the driver had set the brake, and the hair along the back of my neck learned how to hold its breath. I went back into the office to leave the signed bills where a lumper could find them because paperwork deserves faith, even when nothing else does. The sign-in sheet had another line below mine now with a name I recognized from a memorial patch on a hat I see at truck stops alongside mine. A man who had died during the last winter in a jackknife. Everyone swore could not have been his fault. The time beside his name was last year's date, and the same hour. The office printer clicked on with its own mind and printed a receipt for a lumper fee charged to a card number that ended in the 4 digits on my fuel card. I had not swiped. The receipt dropped warm into my hand as if this place had hands and did not mind spending my money. The intercom on the wall hissed, and a voice I wanted to call a voice but could have been moving air said, "Bay C ready," and when you hear a building talk to you in your own language, you realize how many words you use in a day that are built to fit around machines. By the 3rd pallet, I started to watch the walls more than the floor. The steel ribs of the place showed through where drywall had given up, and behind them, a dim throb of light moved, not like a short, more like the slow pulse of a siren. In the convex safety mirror hung at the end of the aisle, my reflection lagged half a beat and lifted the pallet jack handle a fraction after I did, and that small delay made me not want to look up again. I staged 4 pallets and went back into the box for a 5th, and the first 4 had arranged themselves into a double stack that did not look possible without a fork. The air had lost the copper smell and now carried a damp cement smell that tile stores call clean and basements call home. I pushed the jack back in and bumped the stop strip and felt the trailer shift like something had leaned against the far wall from the outside and then leaned back. When I pulled my head around the corner of the dock seal to check, the yard beyond the bumper was empty and my mirror on the truck showed only my own door and a smear of frost catching orange from the dock light. The glow behind the office glass looked warmer than it had a minute ago. I did the math on how fast I could get the rest off the deck and whether pre-staging would make sense. The building put a cold breath in my face through some vent I could not see and made the decision for me. There are noises you learn to trust on docks. The clack of a fork carriage picking up slack, the little squeal of steel wheels on broken paint, the slap of shrink-wrap tails. I heard all of them at once from different corners, a chorus performed by machines I could not see. I moved faster and kept count because counting is a spell. By 8 pallets, my breath steamed so hard it felt like the building had decided to give me back my weather. By 10, my phone buzzed and the screen showed a text from my dispatcher telling me the customer had just authorized an unload and could I verify dock door 3. And while I was reading the note, my ELD clock rolled a minute backward and the HOS screen blinked to on duty unassigned for a second like a ghost had put a thumb on it. I called dispatch and heard my own voice on my voicemail before the first ring finished, the same words I had used last week to check in from a different town, and I hung up because the sound of your own courage from last Tuesday does not belong in a room where the door closes on the truck like a mouth. The office had a hallway behind it, with a window into a break room with a long table and 4 chairs, and a bulletin board with a laminated sheet about lockout-tagout, and a Polaroid of 3 men in high-vis vests with their arms around each other. The edges of the photo had curled, and the names handwritten in the white border had bled into the paper. Someone had tacked a strip of masking tape under it and written, "Bring it home," under a drawing of a tractor that a child had made with severe confidence. A corridor past the break room led to the battery chargers. 3 red boxes lined up like altarpieces, and their charge meters glowed faintly, rising and falling together in a rhythm that made the skin of my arms feel like it should be participating. I stuck a hand near the nearest charger and felt a gentle pulse of warm air and the tiny prick of static that makes hair interested. The backup alarm sounded again very close, and I whipped around ready to jump clear and saw only an empty lane and 4 wheel tracks in dust crossing my fresh ones and a smear of heel rubber where a driver would have stepped down and dragged a boot. I said hello because saying hello is the spell human beings use when they hope to turn strange into neighbor. The sound in the room went lower and more regular, like a person settling. When I tried the office phone, it gave a dial tone that tasted like pennies, and the line never took numbers unless I dialed 0, and that landed me on a recording that said, "You have reached the front desk and please sign in," and it was my voice saying it in a tone I use with strangers who are doing their best. The monitor over the desk that had shown nothing but gray when I walked in now played back video that lagged real time by 10 seconds, me walking past the office door from 10 seconds ago with a flashlight and a bad posture, and it hurt my head to see my own back turned and know the building had its own opinion of my timeline. On the end table, a 3-ring binder sat open to a delivery log, and all the entries for the last month belonged to carriers I knew, some in my company, some not, and the destination column next to each was blank. In the remarks column, someone had written corrective action, and then drawn a small, neat box. The last line carried tonight's date and my trailer, and in the box someone had written, "Breathe." I went back to the dock because when you cannot articulate fear, you can sometimes outwork it. The red light still burned on the wall, and the dock lock held with a loyalty I had not asked for. The rubber seal pressed in on the sides of my trailer, and every few seconds a tremor ran through it like a throat trying not to cough. I decided to drop the plate and pull off the hook and say the load would have to figure itself out. The control box mounted to the wall had one big yellow button for raise and a small black toggle for lock release, and someone had written in Sharpie under the toggle, "Do not break the seal," and the shape of the handwriting matched the handwriting in the office log where my name had already been written. I flipped the toggle anyway, and the lock stayed firm, then clicked tighter like a jaw. The bug zapper over the door stuttered and lit a dark fly into a quiet star. The intercom hissed and the same, not quite a voice said 20 left, and I realized I had not counted that high yet because I had been pretending this would end before I had to decide where it ends. I stepped into the box for another pallet, and the floor felt warmer because heat had climbed the ribs from below. Somewhere beneath the dock, a boiler must have switched on, which made no sense in a building with no man to touch the switch. The jack slid easier over that warmth, and the pallet felt lighter in my hands, as if the wood had dried in the last 5 minutes. When I staged it, the tags facing me shifted to show the SKU, as if the load wanted to be easier to read. My mouth was dry, and my tongue felt thick, and the air smelled like the wet concrete smell had given birth to another smell I did not want to identify. The convex mirror at the end of the aisle showed me again a half-beat late, and then showed a man in a vest step across the open where no man stood, and the picture rolled and swallowed him. I swore and went for the manual chain on the dock lock, pulled it hard enough to scald my palm, and the steel hook let go a 1/4 inch and clamped again with a little sound that almost matched the sound a person makes when they know you will keep trying until you snap something you cannot replace. The plate bounced under my foot, and the impact traveled through my bones like a chord played on a bad piano. At the far end of the dock, a roll-up door had been left half-raised over a concrete ramp that went down toward the yard. I thought if I could open that to bleed cold into the place, it might quiet whatever was waking. I walked to it with my flashlight swinging, stepped under the curtain of chains, and grabbed the strap. The moment my hand closed, the strap moved the other way with a tidy violence like someone stronger had already made a decision, and my part in it would ruin the rhythm. The door fell the last 6 inches and kissed the concrete with a neat rubber thud, and the chains curled around themselves like content snakes. Something clattered overhead in the roof trusses, a small rain of dry grit falling in a pattern that sounded too regular to be accident. I turned and faced the dock where my truck waited with its face pressed to the seal, and for a long second the building inhaled all the little noises we accept on a dock: the tiny hiss of hydraulics, the tire rubber creak, the hum of lights, stopped together, and the vacuum they left behind pressed on my ears hard enough to make the world dim. Then air rushed from behind the plate across my boots with a wet warmth, and the dock light flipped to green like an eye opening, and the hook let go a 1/2 inch, and I moved, because I am a man who knows how to leave when a thing that holds you blinks. I climbed into the cab and turned the key, and the engine came up like it had been waiting at the window for me to run, and the ELD screen threw a warning about movement with door open, and I did not care because the door swung shut by itself and snagged the latch with a certainty that would make a locksmith suspicious. I dropped to low, eased against the lock, felt the hook hold me like a handshake I wanted to break, and then heard the intercom on the wall hiss through the pea-shooter hole and say, "Sorry." Then the lock let go like a parent who has decided to pretend you are old enough to cross the street. I rolled forward, and the rubber seal clung for a breath and then stripped free, and the whole building exhaled through the dockwell with a sound like the trip of a relief valve. I straightened, pulled out to the apron, stopped in the lane, and looked in my mirror. The dock light went dark, then red, then green, then dark again, and the plate lay flat, and a line of vapor ran out of the space under the door like breath on a cold morning. I stared at the office window and thought I saw someone in a vest lift a hand the way men lift hands when trucks pull away and they want to say "drive safe" without saying words, and nothing was there when I blinked. I parked at the edge of the yard to close my doors and counted my pallets because counting is a spell and spells need numbers. 20 staged, 20 on, I said to no one, and the count said I had left 20 and still had 20, and the math held like a bad friend holds your story. The load weight on my paperwork said I had delivered 8,000 pounds. The trailer felt lighter in the tug, enough to make the next hill less work. The BOL on my passenger seat had a fresh stamp that said, "Received by," and a signature I could not read and a time that matched the clock on the dash. The lumper fee showed as charged. The office phone number that had rung to nowhere now connected to a recording that thanked me for keeping the line clear and asked me to come again during normal business hours that the voice did not define. I put the truck in gear and left because I have learned the difference between finishing a job and staying to explain it. At the first truck stop with bright enough light to argue with the last hour, I pulled into a slot and cut the engine and waited for the cab to tell me if the building had climbed in with me. The smell of wet concrete had stayed behind, and all I had was my normal diesel and a jacket that carried an office's different air. On the CB, an old-timer talked about yard dogs run badly in the Carolinas, and a kid asked how to set tandems for a tight receiver and the world pretended to be exactly the world. My phone buzzed with a deposit notification from a carrier services app for a lumper fee credit I had not requested. A message from dispatch arrived that said, "Good turn, thanks for pushing through after hours." And the way they wrote thanks made me want to laugh and sleep at the same time. I stared out the windshield and took a breath, and the glass fogged in a crescent just above the tint band, two small ovals side by side as if someone had leaned in to read my hours. I wiped them away and told the cab that in the morning I would forget. I did not forget. 2 days later, my backhaul took me past the same exit in daylight when the wind had gone home and the sun had put a decent face on things. And I pulled off because curiosity is not a virtue, but it does cut through tired. The industrial park looked emptier under blue sky. The gate to the warehouse lot was chained, and the padlock ate its own rust. The dock lights were dead. The doors had been welded shut in a line by someone with a sense of symmetry. A for-lease banner snapped itself against the corrugated wall with a rhythm that might have been assistance or a warning. I parked at the curb and walked up to the office window and cupped my hands against the glare and saw a room stripped bare. No desk, no monitor, dust lines on the floor where furniture had once sat, a rectangle on the wall where a corkboard had hung, the outline of a cat calendar in sunburned paint. I turned to go, and a small ripple moved across the dust like a breath and settled, and I told myself a truck had gone by on the distant road and made the world thinner for a second. Back in the cab, the ELD pinged with an appointment reminder for tonight at a different address, and for a heartbeat emptied itself of text and displayed a single word that I will not claim a machine chose for me. Breathe. When drivers tell stories over coffee and pie, the buildings are always haunted in the old ways with men who died and want to keep working, and lights that turn on to remind you someone forgot the switch. This was not that. This felt like a place that had learned from the people who ran it and missed the shape of their days and decided to finish the night with me, because the last load it had handled did not get handled. And any machine with a purpose gets mean when you take the purpose away. If you ever pull down a narrow street into a yard that looks empty, and the dock lock grabs its own hook, and the dock plate lifts like a tongue, and the sign-in sheet already carries your name, remember that buildings that know how to breathe also know how to let go, if you give them the dignity of finishing what they started. Stage your pallets where the floor says, and do not stack higher than shoulder, and keep your hands out of places your bones do not understand. And when the intercom calls you by a name nobody in that office should know, answer with the same voice you use on a radio late at night when you are trying to keep a stranger awake. If the lock will not release, ask. And if the place pauses long enough to inhale, leave. Because anything that needs to breathe can also starve, and you do not want to be the last bite a hungry building takes. I am a trucker, and my stories usually end with a scale ticket and a bed. But this one ends with a warehouse still humming in the corner of my head and a habit I cannot shake. When I back into a dock now, I set the brake and put a palm on the dash and listen for a heartbeat that does not belong to my engine. If I hear it, I stage the freight quickly and with respect, and I make sure the lock lets go the first time I ask. If I do not hear it, I move anyway, because there is enough breath in the rest of the world for both of us, and I have miles before morning. The interstate was a black ribbon pulled tight across the high desert, and my cab was the only lit room for miles. A small square of gauges and coffee steam moving east under a sky that looked like an overturned bowl of cold iron. I was hauling dry freight out of Gallup toward Amarillo with a delivery window that played arithmetic games I had learned to stop taking personally. The wind came low off the mesas and made the trailer lean just enough to keep me honest. Channel 19 hissed and popped with stray voices that blew in and out like tumbleweed. I had another hour in me before I would need to find a place to shut down, which out here means picking between a lit slab of concrete pretending to be a plaza and a dark pullout pretending to be safety. Somewhere past Klein's Corners it appeared in my mirror, two low headlights sliding up the right lane like a decision I had not made yet. The car held a steady approach until it should have passed, then fell in behind my trailer at a respectful distance that felt like insult. I tapped my brakes twice to tell a human to either go on or back off. The headlights did not dip or flare. They matched the exact half-mile an hour that separated my speed from theirs and settled like a stone into my night. I gave it a minute because the road teaches patience or it takes it from you. The car stayed in the pocket where my mirrors make bright dots into eyes. I signaled right and eased onto the shoulder to let it go. The car eased right with me and then left with me when I came back. That is when the discomfort entered my hands. I toggled my hazards to tell whoever sat back there that they were writing a ticket I did not want to pay. The orange blink washed over the nose of a sedan, a late model black Crown Vic with a push bar and a grille that had once meant law and now meant auction, and the windshield reflected my lamps without returning the silhouette of a headrest or a person. The glass looked empty. The angle could have lied, but I have been looking into windshields for too long not to trust the part of my eye that is older than logic. I keyed up. Back door, either pass or give me your lane. We have room to do this polite. The radio gave me wind and someone in Texas talking about a steer. The car's lights did not move. I tried again with more authority because tone travels. Back door, move it. The lights brightened a fraction like a person laying a hand on your shoulder to make a point and then dimmed to where they had been. I told myself to find a crowd. If you get two more big trucks around anything stupid, stupid gets discouraged. A pair of trailers up ahead ran in stagger, and I closed on them with the kind of hunger you carry for other people when you are tired and sensible enough to admit it. The car behind me closed. When I tucked in a quarter-mile behind the pair, the mystery set up a perfect triangle with us, forming a little convoy that nobody asked for. The driver of the lead called out on 19, "Got yourself a tail with a personality." I asked him if he could see a silhouette. He said the windshield looked like a fish tank with the lights out. The second trucker, a bull hauler with that high restlessness in his voice, men who haul live-weight pickup from their cargo, said he had heard about a driverless thing out of Santa Rosa, a car that chased brakes and waited for nerves. I told him to tell a better story, and he chuckled in a way that said he preferred someone else's fear to his own. A rest area sign promised bathrooms and vending machines and reasons not to stop. I took it anyway. The car took it with me. The lot sat in a shallow bowl of dirt, with two rows of trucks facing each other like old horses dozing, and a line of sedans with engines running so their owners could pretend the night did not exist. I backed into a slot with my trailer square, left the engine at a low idle, and watched the mirror. The Crown Vic rolled to a stop one truck length behind my bumper, dead center, straight as a ruler, and sat like a servant waiting for orders. I unbuckled slowly, not because I thought it would matter, but because haste makes men act like targets. I grabbed my tire buddy and stepped down into cold that smelled like sage and antifreeze. The sedan's engine hummed on the high note old Fords carry when they want you to think they are younger. I walked back as if checking my doors and stared into the windshield. The interior was dark and clean in a way that used car lots achieve with armor and vacuum. No papers on the dash, no jacket, no fuzz of dog hair on the seat, no hanging tag swinging on a mirror, no head. The driver's seat looked empty, the headrest unsilhouetted by any human shape that would have blocked my headlight glare. I felt the urge to knock on the glass like you do when a cousin hides in a bedroom during a party and you want them to either come out or declare their need to be left alone. The door locks clicked once, a little animal sound that had no kindness in it, and the high beams flashed in the universal language of "pass me." But the car did not move. I stepped back toward my cab. The sedan rolled forward 8 inches without a sound, like a dog following a master 4 steps before a leash tugs. I climbed into the truck and locked both doors because habit is how we survive getting lessons we did not ask for. On the radio, the bull hauler said something that made me feel stupider for not thinking of it. Shine your phone camera at low angle into the glass and see if you catch the outline. I did, and the screen showed empty seat, steering wheel, vinyl, no body, no motion. My thumb shook enough to make the picture jitter, and I hated my own biology for making me part of the problem. I put the phone down and watched the backup camera feed on my dash. The sedan's headlights made two precise spears pointed at my ICC bumper. The hot air coming off my exhaust made the beams ripple. The car never broke the perfect T. After 2 minutes of not moving in a space built for moving, I pulled out. The sedan did too. We merged back to I-40, and my stomach settled into a hard knot of math and superstition. I decided to get to a way station. Cameras and lights and law make ridiculousness behave. The sign for the eastbound scales lit closed in green. That meant the building was staffed enough to operate the sign and not staffed enough to make my night better. I took the ramp anyway. The sedan took it with me. The canopy lights washed the concrete in hospital tone, and the building's windows showed nobody who wanted to look at me. I rolled across the platform slow enough to trigger a hiss from the ghost of my first teacher, and the axle numbers glowed fine on the screen, all legal, all boring. The sedan stopped 10 feet behind my trailer and killed its lights. In the reflection of the weighhouse glass, its windshield showed me, not it, and I did not like being the only person in the picture with a face. The exit ramp looped down past a set of spike strips that caught my eye a second before my brain chose gratitude. The spikes were the wrong way deterrent, a row of toothy steel that would shred tires if you came in from the exit. I thought about leading the sedan into a mistake any person would not make. I took the loop in a wide, slow arc that would be absurd for any human in any sedan to copy. The sedan copied me exactly, fell onto the wrong concrete, rolled across the teeth, and the front tires unzipped with a sound that turned my mouth dry. The car rocked onto its rims and kept pace. The sparks that shot from under it peeled the night in orange fans, and my mirrors filled with a sheet of light that made my truck look like it had found a sunset. The smell of burned rubber came through my vents late and heavy. The sedan did not sag. It did not even complain with a wobble. It rode steel and fire and followed. I keyed up on 19 and told anyone within 20 miles they were about to see something they would spend years explaining badly. The lead of my earlier pair came back a mile ahead and said he was sliding off at the next truck stop with the big cow on the billboard and would circle the lot if I needed a box to hide in. I thanked him, and then a second voice cut in with calm that made me love the world again for a moment. State Patrol eastbound 3 miles out, describe your tale. I said Black Crown Vic, no plates I could see, front tires shredded and throwing sparks, appears to have no visible driver. The patrolman said get to light and stay in the cab and do not be a hero. The light of the truck stop popped up like a late party in the middle of a dark town, and I took the ramp with the care you give a hummingbird if it lands on your wrist. The sedan took it with me and met the pavement crack for crack like it had spent a lifetime learning this exact lot. I rolled into the lanes between the fuel islands and the Crown Vic threaded behind me with the same precision men use when they own their mistakes. The bull hauler and the lead pulled out of their slots and formed a loose L beside the pumps as if they had practiced it, their trailers making a wall I could tuck into. I slid behind them and stopped with my rear doors facing the main lane. The sedan stopped 15 feet back and went silent. No fan noise, no metal tick, nothing but heat coming off it in a visible ribbon. The trooper's SUV swept in a second later and parked in the main lane with its bar red and blue glaring and the spotlight deadlined onto the Crown Vic's windshield. He approached at a crouch with his hand low and calm, like he had a lot of years and enough stories to tell, and hoped this would not be another. He peered into the glass and tilted his head, and then he did something I will not forget, because it told me what he saw. He took his free hand off the pistol and touched the light beam with his fingers, like he could push it further into the car. His voice went quieter when he spoke to the radio at his shoulder. No occupant visible. Front tires gone. Vehicle appears to be in gear, or otherwise holding itself. No plate. Copy that. He stepped sideways and put his palm on the hood in that old way lawmen do when they want a car to know which side God is on. The Crown Vic's engine snapped to life like it had been holding its breath to be polite, and the car leapt forward a foot. The trooper moved like a man who has decided to live, and the bumper missed his thigh by just enough to teach him respect for luck. He recovered with grace, and his gun came out because habit is how you walk away from a thing like that. But it is hard to shoot a car and make it mean anything to a judge. He aimed at the grill and shouted, "Stop," and the car did, and then the high beams lit and held his face in white. He stepped back and cut the light with the edge of his hand, and the car turned the beams off as if embarrassed, then edged left to peek around my trailer. The trooper looked at me like I could explain, and I lifted both palms like a child who spilled milk and is trying to be honest about it. The bull hauler keyed up. "Driver, you want to back up between us and the dumpster? We will give you a funnel." I did, inching backward while two men with tired voices on the radio talked me into a space no sensible person would try in daylight. The Crown Vic rolled forward the same 2 inches I rolled back and then paused as if reconsidering what it meant to be stubborn. The trooper climbed into his SUV and pushed it nose to nose with the black car. They idled at each other like bulls. He was on the radio with someone who sounded like they knew the car. I caught phrases through the mess of CB chatter and diesel noise. Decommissioned, auction, previous incident, trooper fatal years back, Crown Vic Unit 17, local legend, prank calls, no way the same car. He asked me if I had dash cam. I said yes. He told me not to erase a thing. The Crown Vic sat there in a light bath and made the quiet that hot metal makes. When he tried to push it back with the SUV, the Vic rolled 1 inch, then another, and then planted as if a human foot had pressed a brake pedal that did not exist for anyone to press. He looked down at his console like a man who wants the next idea to be honest. Then he popped the latch on the spike strip box. He hauled the strip out under the light, and the Crown Vic listened like a dog curious about the shape of voice. He threw the strip under the rear tires, and the rear collapsed onto steel teeth, and the car finally sagged like a person who has been pretending not to be tired. The trooper exhaled, and the radio in his car made a remark about backup, and everything went a little smaller, as if the world had decided to be normal again, because there were more people to witness it. They towed it out of the lane on dolly wheels that bit the rear and lifted the rims, and the car rolled obedient in defeat like a convict who has chosen dignity. As it passed, my mirror caught the interior again. The driver's seat had no wear. The steering wheel was immaculate. The floor mat was clean to an insult. Something about that emptiness felt worse than any amount of blood or personal trash would have. The wrecker hauled the car to the edge of the lot, and the troopers fussed and measured and took pictures with flash that made the scene look like prom. One trooper pulled the trunk release with a long hook through the rear seat gap because prudence is a habit, and the lid popped to reveal nothing but a spare that had never kissed asphalt, a jack, and a folded vinyl cover like what you throw over a thing when you throw away the reason for it to exist. He closed it with 2 fingers and looked a little older. He took my information like a man who is building a story he will not tell at his kitchen table. He told me if I saw it again to call, and it was a kind instruction that existed mostly to make me feel like daylight is a contract. Dawn thinned the sky and made the lot look like a place instead of a stage. The bull hauler came over and clapped my shoulder and called me driver with the kind of warmth that should be a currency. The lead shook my hand as if we had run cattle together across a range that had tried to take one of us. I fueled up because the meter asked, and I wanted to do something my brain could tally. I cleaned the insects from my windshield that the desert likes to paint on. When I pulled out, the tow had already left with the Crown Vic, heading west toward a yard that would make a file for it and pretend the file was a solution. The state SUV followed with its lights off. I merged back to the eastbound, and the sunlight drew a careful line along my hood. 10 miles later, past a long straightaway where the land lay down like it wanted to rest, a pair of low headlights appeared in my mirror at the edge of the horizon and held there, humming, patient, learning my speed like a song. I told myself it was a different car, owned by a man with ordinary human faults. I told myself my hands knew the work, and my engine knew the grade, and my head knew the distance to the next town. The radio hissed and quieted, and for a long minute nothing existed except white lines and air. Then a voice I could not name said in the speakers like a father in a doorway telling a kid to keep it between ditches, keep your nose clean. I tightened my belt, checked my mirrors, and drove. If you want rules, here are the only ones I trust. Do not engage with anything that refuses to make a face when it demands your attention. Do not let a perfect following distance flatter you into ignoring how wrong it feels. If a car matches your mistakes without crowning you for making them, it is not a man. Find light, find people, find cameras and a trooper with the patience to put his hand on a hood before he puts his hand on a gun. Do not count on tire spikes to give the lesson you think they will. Rims ride, sparks lie. If it will not pass you and it will not leave you and no one is holding the wheel, recall that evil loves precision, and precision is what keeps a big truck alive and decide which side of that line you intend to stand. I am a trucker, and I have miles to go, and I have learned that some nights the desert decides to invent new predators. When it happens, you do the job anyway. You take the lane, you keep the gear that keeps you safe. You find the men who will form a wall or a funnel, and you go through. And if a voice you half recognize tells you to keep your nose clean while the mirror glows with a pair of eyes that never blink, you nod and behave, because sometimes the only thing between you and whatever is following is the shape of the man you are when nobody else is inside the glass.